At the time, 1990-91, I was Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Air Force, and my name is Bruce, B-R-U-C-E, middle initial A, last name Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, and since I was a second lieutenant, my call sign's been Orville, so more people know me by Orville Wright than Bruce. And then my duty title at that time as a Lieutenant Colonel was the commander of the 614th Fighter Squadron, also known as the Lucky Devils, permanently stationed at Torrejon Air Base in Spain. We deployed in August of '90 from Torrejon to Doha, Qatar, this Doha International Airfield there, and that's the airfield from which we flew all our combat missions from the beginning of Desert Storm on the 17th of January '91 through the end of Desert Storm. It was about a 7-month long deployment. I retired as the commander of U.S. Forces Japan in 2008 and didn't plan on it, but the defense industry found me and so I work here in the local area trying to ensure we build the right stuff for our Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. Yeah, it's pretty simple. Saddam Hussein, with a very large modern military, the Iraqi military, that had been built up over the years with oil wealth, among other things, and the experience of a long-term war between Iran and Iraq, fielded a military that was capable of invading Kuwait. Kuwait was a sovereign nation. There were some justification that didn't really make sense. At any rate, it was certainly an uninvited invasion of the free country of Kuwait. That then led to one of a number of diplomatic and economic actions against Iraq, which led to a decision in January 1991 to attack Saddam Hussein's ground forces, the Iraqi military, which were then occupying Kuwait, as well as deployed all over, really, Iraq and what we call the Kuwaiti Theater of Operations, the KTO. Pretty much, not just deployed across Kuwait and occupying airfields in Kuwait, occupying the city of Kuwait City. They were also deployed along the Saudi Arabian border, and at one point actually invaded into Saudi Arabia. Essentially to liberate Kuwait, to move Saddam Hussein's military forces out of Kuwait and back into their own country in Iraq. Well, I think the Air Force made that happen. The United States Air Force defeated what was then, and in the last 25 years, in fact, the largest ground force, estimates of 750,000 deployed ground maneuver forces, along with very advanced Iraqi air forces. The role of the U.S. Air Force in close cooperation within a coalition essentially destroyed the ground maneuver capability, ground maneuver forces, the Iraqi Army, and took out the Iraqi air defense system, strategic level command and control targets in downtown Baghdad, and within really a short 40 days or so defeated the Iraqi military. That then led to a relatively short period of ground combat, forcing the Iraqis to surrender in place or retreat completely out of Kuwait and back into Iraq. Well, the 614th Fighter Squadron, known as the Lucky Devils, patch that goes back to World War II, a lot of history. Again, deployed from Torrejon Air Base in Qatar in August of 1990 in what was then called Desert Shield. The real mission, the immediacy of that mission had to do with concern about Saddam Hussein's Iraqi military continuing to move south out of Kuwait and into GCC countries, including Qatar and the UAE. And so there was a real sense of immediacy to deploy as many forces as possible to deter further aggressiveness by the Iraqi military. And of course, the Air Force was first on the list, along with Navy aircraft carriers, to deploy in the region. And there was a rapid deployment of forces from the continental United States, and then relatively fewer forces deploying from Europe to put enough air power in place in the GCC countries, Gulf Cooperation Council countries, including Qatar, so that Iraqi military adventurism would be certainly discouraged, if not deterred. And then for those few months between August and December, as I described earlier, there was a decision made to attack the Iraqi military and force them to retreat from Kuwait and liberate Kuwait. Well, we're all excited. That's what we trained for our whole career. And to take 24 F-16s and a squadron of very capable, highly trained pilots and maintenance professionals as a squadron commander and really the detachment commander for that unit, to deploy from Torrejon 7 hours to a place we'd never been before is what we'd been trained to do. And our training, I think, really prepared us. We'd spent a lot of time in that time frame in the 80s and late 80s being as ready as possible to defeat the Warsaw Pact when the Soviet Union was still the Soviet Union. As we know, the wall came down, and as we stopped our primary mission to pull a nuclear alert, to take all our training, our survive to operate training, all our capability, 24 F-16s, to liberate essentially Kuwait was exactly what we'd all held up our right hand to do. Well, the 16th and 17th included, were really based on a good deal of preparation for the previous months. We'd very actively exercised with and trained with the Guttery of Mary Air Force, who flew F-1s, French Mirage F-1s, same airplanes as the Iraqis flew. We had also a French Air Force element with us. We had Canadian F-18s with us. And so we were very lean forward, if you will, to execute our planning objectives. And our planning objectives for the 16th and the morning of the 17th were to attack an Iraqi-held airfield, two Iraqi-held airfields in Kuwait, Ali al-Salam and Al-Jaber. What I remember most about that first morning as a squadron commander, you flew just about every day and, of course, led the first mission. What I remember most about that morning was is we had 16 F-16s lined up, and we all had varying elements of our chemical warfare gear on because of the threat of Scud missiles, which could be chemical, biological, or radiological. We were very ready. So if you can picture 16 F-16s lined up, 16 pilots, obviously, and 16 crew chiefs. And if you've watched the Thunderbirds launch their F-16s, you know the crew chief is a very important part of that as he or she stands right in front of the airplane. There were also probably 500 other people on the ramp. This was the first combat mission for what was called the 401st Provisional Wing. We were very much a team by then, everybody helping everybody else, every airman a warrior. And we had practiced for Scud launches and Scud alerts, Scuds hitting our airfield, and we were very prepared to do that because that's what we practiced all through the 80s to defeat the Warsaw Pact. We had never practiced in the few months we'd been there, however, for a Scud launch, Scud alert a few minutes before taxi. And so the ramp completely covered, people with or without their chemical and biological and radiological protection gear on, and we get a Scud alert. So now what do? It's 5 minutes before launch. I made the decision right away we were just going to launch. It's funny now, it wasn't funny then. As I looked out the front of my airplane, at my 16 airplanes, it was sort of Keystone Cops across the ramp. Everybody running for cover, trying to put on their chem gear. We were pretty good at it because in a minute or two, few minutes, the ramp was cleared off. There was nobody on the ramp except for 16 F-16s, 16 pilots, and 16 crew chiefs. And so I'm looking at our crew chiefs, and my crew chief's name was Mike Hare. I said, Mike, you need to unhook your comm cord. You've done everything you can. The pins are pulled. I'm ready to taxi in just a few minutes. You need to put on your chem gear and seek cover. And then Airman Hare said, sir, I'm standing right here until you taxi. I am not moving. And as I looked down the line of 16 F-16s, here are 16 crew chiefs, all looking north where the Scud would have come from had it been targeting our airfield, and not a one of them moved. And they stood there until I taxied out. We all taxied out. They saluted, as they did every day. And as I kept rolling around to the end of the runway and took off, I looked over. They were still on the ramp making sure their jets and their pilots got off safely. It was incredible, forever memory, obviously. And going to then Kuwait and bombing two airfields that were held by the Iraqis successfully and recovering. Seeing for the first time SAM shot at us and a lot of AAA. Integrating with the Wild Weasels, who were really saved one of my pilots' life as they launched on an SA-2, and you could see the SA-2 coming up targeted on my number 3. It was an incredible experience. I would say, though, our training all kicked in, but again, every airman a warrior, and courage is contagious. and courage counts. Unfortunately, on the 19th, on a very demanding mission, we lost 2 pilots. And the way our days were set up, we'd fly 16 F-16s in the first go in the morning, and we flew all generally daylight missions. We did not have lantern pods or any advanced systems that other airplanes had. So I led a flight, a mission with 16 F-16s. We struck targets just to the west of Baghdad. And then when I landed, our targets had been changed somewhat, and so the afternoon go was going to go after an oil refinery right in Baghdad. And that was very concerning because the threat was significant. By the 3rd day of the war, we felt like we had a pretty good handle on the integrated air defense system. The Iraqis had stopped shooting SAMs pretty much because of the effectiveness of the wild weasels. And so we were cautiously optimistic that in this very large package going to Baghdad, our 16 airplanes would be okay. The mission was led by John Nichols, our assistant ops officer, weapons school graduate, who, by the way, now is the adjutant general for the state of Texas, 2-star Adjutant General John Nichols. In fact, we're going to have a Desert Storm reunion this weekend in Austin with him. That mission launched, went after, ingressed as directed by the air tasking order to attack the refinery, a major refinery in Baghdad, and we hit that target, but we lost 2 F-16s. One of our F-16s was shot down by an SA-6. The other F-16 was shot down. F-16 was shot down by an SA-3. The F-16 shot down by the SA-3 was flown by Tico Tice, Jeff Tice, Major Jeff Tice. And the F-16 shot down by the SA-6 was flown by Mike Roberts, Captain Mike Roberts. We had heard Tico get out of the airplane. We knew he was alive, but unfortunately he was immediately captured. For 2 days, based on what we saw in film and all indicators, we thought Mike Roberts was dead because we had no sight of a chute, possible indicator of a chute. And there's a whole other story that goes with that I'll get into in a minute. At any rate, both Mike Roberts and Tico Tice were captured and held by the Iraqis as POWs. Now then, what happens back in Qatar for our lucky devils and our crew chiefs and our tar wing? I've never seen more courageous, lean forward, work harder airmen ever. So the enemy may have thought they would discourage us or possibly defeat us by shooting down airplanes. I think we all appreciate, and there's lots of military history examples of this. When that happens, American warriors fight harder. The morning after that mission, I walked out of the ops room and somebody had taken a stencil and red paint, and over the door of the ops room stenciled the words, "God bless Tico and MR." And as every pilot went to war to fly a mission, the remainder of Desert Storm from the 19th on, they'd slap that door like they were going to go fly in a Super Bowl game with a grim, determined look on their face to take the fight to the enemy. The good news back home is we found out via CNN that Mike Roberts was alive in a couple days. And for my wife, Carrie, there's a whole other story back at Torrejon as she stayed there with spouses during the entire seven plus months to try to do the squadron commander's wife's job, and that's to take care of the brood. So she had to go with the chaplain, the DO, flight surgeon, to tell Patty Roberts that her husband had been shot down and might not be alive. And that's what squadron commanders' wives do. When she walked into the quarters where Patty was to give her the information along with the 3 guys in service dress, Patty was 9 months pregnant, about to have a baby any day. And of course, when she saw the officers in uniform, collapsed. At that time, Carrie didn't know what else to do, so she's the one on the floor with Patty. There's the 3 guys in service dress kind of go, what do I do now? And she was able to give reassurance to Patty that there was a chance, and there was a chance. We'd seen the possibility, or one guy in the flight who'd had Vietnam experience, had seen possibly a seat ejection. So she just said, look, Patty, there's a chance he's still alive. So 2 days later, she's at a hospital appointment, and like the rest of us, she sees in the hospital waiting room her husband, Mike Roberts, alive. Not necessarily well, but alive and kicking from Baghdad. And oh, by the way, their son Drew was born while Mike was in Baghdad. And there's no better picture in my life than when we got Mike back, and here's Patty and baby Drew. Mike Roberts sitting in his Barco Lounger in quarters with new baby boy in one hand and a long neck Budweiser in the other hand. So it's a great story. Well, I think what we were able to do was unprecedented, obviously. More importantly, I think it surprised the heck out of the Iraqi military that we could own the electromagnetic spectrum, that we could get through his integrated air defense system undetected with our stealth capability with the 117, that we could use precision weapons, laser-guided weapons, to put 2,000-pound bombs through doorways, and that we could sustain a level of effort in a coalition of friends that include the GCC states, obviously the British, the Australians. We actually had the Syrian military on our side at that time. I think all that sort of overwhelmed the Iraqi military and the Iraqi government, that such capability could be come to be employed, come to bear against what his attack, his military, which he was very proud of, what his military was able to do in the invasion of Kuwait. So he was surprised, and I think we did very well. A lot of our advanced electronic warfare capabilities, which have not really been tested in combat, but the idea is proven, started in Vietnam, worked. The F-111 worked, the Compass Call worked, the Wild Weasel mission, modified F-4s, F-4Gs with HARM missiles. That technology all was very effective against the advanced integrated air defense system. I'd also offer that while precision weapons were very effective, our F-16s, our 24 F-16s flying a 16 turn 16, 32 sorties a day, dropped 1.3 million pounds of bombs. And after we initially attacked targets in Baghdad, we just worked on deployed enemy forces, deployed enemy ground forces. The metric General Schwarzkopf gave the air commander, General Horner, was he wanted at least 50+% of the Iraqi Republican Guard destroyed before the beginning of the ground war. And so we did that. We did that with F-16s and A-10s and F-111s, certainly F-18s from the Navy. So combat air forces, and really Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, there were Apache attacks by the Army against GCI sites. We destroyed the Iraqi military, the ground maneuver forces and their air forces. As you may remember, not only did we shoot down a number of Iraqi air-to-air fighters, many of them chose to just escape to Iran. And in addition to that, we took out their eyes and their ears, their command and control capability. And there are plenty of pictures and testimony from ground forces from our own U.S. Army and Marine Corps as they went into Kuwait and Iraq, that while there were certainly some intense combat operations on the ground, that entire operation lasted about 100 hours. And that's a credit to the joint and coalition air power that was employed against the Iraqi military. Well, initially we had very good imagery of fixed targets. We always are dependent on space for communications. But I'll tell you that we've got a lot of room for improvement to fully integrate the terrific capabilities of our space forces with combat air forces cockpits. We've still got work to do. There's excellent imagery and SIGINT capability in space that can be shared at the tactical level. It wasn't shared after the first couple of days of Desert Storm, not at the cockpit level, not at the squadron level for sure. And so from targeting to battle damage assessment, space has a lot of capability we need to continue to bring to the fight. Well, singular. The U.S. Army officers that I've known over the years would all tell you that they found a very damaged Iraqi military during their 100 hours of ground combat. Well, I think the Marine ground forces and the Army ground forces were important to force the retreat of the Iraqi military out of Kuwait. Again, going back to General Schwarz's metric, 50% plus of the Iraqi military had been destroyed before we began ground combat operations. So that's how important air power was to Desert Storm. I think there's really three, and I'd go back to every airman a warrior and courage counts. The we won that fight with every AFSC. It wasn't just the pilots or just the crew chiefs. It was every AFSC, from logistics to the civil engineers that built the bomb dump. Every airman is a warrior, and we're proving that every day. The other point I would make out of 2 or 3 here is you can never have enough friends in a big fight. The coalition we built wasn't just important at the time, it's enduring. When you make friends, when the United States Air Force makes friends around the world, it sticks. The officer and the squadron commander of the Qatar Emiri Air Force F-1 Squadron, which, by the way, eventually went with us to attack targets in Kuwait. So we went with these F-1s, which we had to escort with F-16s because they looked exactly like Iraqi F-1s, and we didn't want them to get shot down. Those 2 lieutenant colonels each became air chiefs. They became the most senior ranking Air Force officer in their Air Force and remained friends with the United States Air Force and the United States government, with America, for their careers and certainly for their lives as senior leaders of their Air Force. Similarly, our GCC counterparts in the UAE, in Oman, all have similar memories of and relationships with the U.S. Air Force. And we talked about Al Udeid back then and the new airfield we wanted to build. You know, we've got a KAOC now at Al Udeid and Qatar. That started in many ways with the friendships we built in 1990-91. The second point I would make is air power is not free. And it's important that we can take the lessons learned from Desert Storm and understand that we had invested in a Air Force that was much more capable than any in the world. We destroyed the Iraqi military, ground, in fact, naval and air forces. However, our peers, our near peers at the time becoming our peers, Russia and China, for sure learned from that. And so the third point I would make as a lesson learned is we can't stop, we can never stop investing in the asymmetric capabilities of air power. And we have to understand that in that environment, 25 years ago, we saw some of the most advanced integrated air defense systems at that time, 25 years ago. Well, a lot happens in 25 years ago. So in Russia and China especially, now we see even more advanced integrated air defense systems, surface-to-air and air-to-air, that drive the requirements for stealth capabilities that go along with the F-22 and the F-35 and a new bomber. And we need to own the electromagnetic spectrum as we did during Desert Storm. I think those are sort of summarize the important lessons learned for today and going into the future, into the next decade or so, for how important our Air Force is. We have to invest in our Air Force, and we have to understand what capacities and capabilities inside our Air Force will make a difference, offer an asymmetric capability for the United States government. In fact, if not a third technology offset, as Secretary Work talks about, if we invest in the lessons learned from Desert Storm. Well, time goes too fast, and I think 2 things go through your mind. You know, the fact that the Wright family's been in this fight, been a friend to that region for 25 years. And then I think the second point is friends you go to war with, the friends you make, your counterparts, that those men and women who are such an honor to serve with are a lifetime gift. And that's why we're going to get together this weekend in Austin, Texas, and have a couple drinks and talking about Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Well, I think what I would say is Desert Storm continues to define today, the memories, the lessons learned from Desert Storm continue to define today who we are. We have the ability to defend the nation that's founded on not just the history of Desert Storm, but the history of air power from World War I to World War II to Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, and today. We've been in this fight now for 25 years. So those airmen who are out there today are critically important to the safety of our citizens, of our fellow citizens, and critically important to the future of the United States of America. And that was shown certainly in Desert Storm, proved in Desert Storm, and builds upon the history of air power and the history of what the United States Air Force has and continues to bring to our national security.